Right, I think we'll get underway. When I say I'd leave it a couple of minutes, when you're sat here silently, it always seems like an eternity. So, welcome everybody to The Need for Speed. This is following on from the presentation I did at the B Corps and R week, if some of you saw that. So, if we could move to the agenda screen, please. What we're going to cover for you today, I'm going to introduce our guests, talk about the Achilles heel, the major weakness in most people's crisis communication strategy, as I perceive it. I want to look at why it's important, and we've got a takeaway toolkit for you today. And at the end, we're going to do a dark site demonstration. I'm very conscious when I talk about dark sites, um, because most organizations don't have them. Most people don't realize what they do. So what we'll do is run through a demonstration of a dark site, and that will take a few minutes, because we do say you can get it up and running in 2 minutes. So it tends to be quick. And questions and answers. So if you have questions and answers, you can pop them into the chat. We'll probably pick up on them at the end, but if there's anything we can incorporate in the way we go along, we will. So if we could have the next slide, please. I'd like to introduce our guest today, Chris Tucker. Delighted to have her here. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Nigel and Marcus as well, and thank you all for coming along this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to talking to you all and hopefully getting some questions from you as well. Just a little bit about me. I think Nigel and I've discovered we've both been in our respective careers for probably about the same amount of time, albeit my background is in public relations. I've worked in the public, voluntary, and in the private sector. My last in-house position, I was a PR director for Barclays. And I guess that's probably one of the main reasons I've ended up doing a lot of crisis communications work, because working for a large global organization like that, you're never really very far from an issue or a crisis. Nowadays, I work for myself. I split my time between lecturing and actually still having my own private clients in areas like financial PR and ESG. And I co-chair the CIPR Crisis Communications Network, which is a group of PR and comms professionals that spread best practice in crisis comms. So that's my kind of voluntary work, as it were. In terms of my crisis communication work, I do everything from going into organizations and writing their crisis communication plans from scratch, auditing those that they have against the ISO or BSI standard, making recommendations for improvement. I also run workshops for organizations and their communications staff on crisis. And one of the really fun things I do as well is simulating crises for organizations and putting them through what a crisis might actually look like. And so thank you very much for letting me come along and talk to you. Nigel.
Thank you. I'm Nigel Hoggart. I'm the Market Development Director for Press Area. I've got 30 plus years in IT, spanning most of the time IT disaster recovery and business continuity. I got involved in the early days of real-time replication and recovery, where we could recover systems, individual servers within 15 minutes. And I became the subject matter expert on disaster recovery as a service for a company many of you may have heard of, SunGard Availability Services, who sadly are no longer here. And now I'm a crisis communications specialist supporting Press Area. And the interesting thing about Press Area, and the thing that got me excited about the Press Area solution, was that it was the first dark site solution I'd really seen that could be used instantly. And the thing I realized from quite a long career in IT disaster recovery is that you're only as strong in a disaster and a crisis as your crisis communication messaging. So organizations might have spent huge amounts of money on their resiliency, on their BCP programs and plans. But in terms of when it comes to a crisis, if you're not able to communicate that to the wider audience and your stakeholders, then you really it can be completely negated as an investment, because people at that time will only know what you're able to tell them. And if you can't get your crisis communications out there at all, you don't have a crisis communications plan, in my view. And Press Area with the dark site really fascinated me because it delivers that ability to communicate in a crisis. So next slide, please, if I may. And this was the thing that got me excited about things. And it's interesting that I get excited about things dating from 1834 to 1892. It's actually 1850 when C.H. Spurgeon said this. He was a preacher and an editor of a newspaper, an Englishman. He said, a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. Now, at the time he made that statement, and by the way, there is a whole debate on whether he made it or someone else did, but let's assume he did. It was 2 years before the invention of the telegraph. That meant the predominant mode of transport at the time for delivering messages was the horse. And if a horse could get messages halfway around the world before the truth had got its boots on, I think we're all in deep difficulty today with social media and the ability to really pass on misinformation, misinterpretations, and let's be honest, downright lies before you can get out there and defend your position. So next slide, please. Chris, you were going to...
Yes, we thought it would be useful to just have a definition of what we mean by crisis communication and why it's important. I mean, it is all about managing your crisis narrative and getting that crisis narrative out there to all your stakeholders. And the objective, as it says here on the slide, is to minimize damage and speed recovery. So crisis communication is not an add-on. It's not a nice to have. It's pretty fundamental to managing the crisis. I mean, for example, if you people are working in business continuity, your organization is in a crisis and you are actually doing a really good job getting everything back up and running again. If nobody knows that that's actually happening, then your efforts are not going to protect the ongoing reputation of the organization. I'll give you another example. People often see during a crisis government getting involved, and government pretty much, well, they have their own crises. They don't particularly have time for yours. But if they're not convinced, and it's really communication that convinces them, if they're not convinced that you're in control of the crisis and you're the right people to put it back and put the organization back on track, then that's when they get involved. So crisis communication is pretty fundamental to the whole crisis management process. And I think Nigel's going to give you some numbers, as it were, to support that.
Yes, next slide, please. First, I'm just going to look at reputation damage. I consider this the Achilles heel of all organizations in terms of their plans and their protection. Because if we look at the business continuity industry, and you know, from my background, I've been around it since the BCI were formulated, actually, and set up. Processes and operations are to a degree protected by the BC and the resiliency plans. Insurance can cover your operational losses, and nowadays insurance will provide an element of cyber recovery and protection from ransomware and that type of thing. But when it comes to reputation damage, that's a consequential loss, and consequential losses have always historically been very difficult to insure again. So there's an Achilles heel in the protection companies have got. If they aren't able to protect their reputation at times of crisis, and the only way to do that really is through crisis communications, then insurance won't get them out of a hole, and the best BC and resiliency plans will not get them out of that hole. So that's where I sort of stand on things, and why I got involved with Press Area, because of that Achilles heel and because of that gap. Next slide, please. And it matters. So if we look at the Aon cyber resiliency report from 2023, reputational risk and cyber attacks go hand in hand. You know, if we've seen it recently with arguably Co-op and Marks and Spencers. Most people seem to think they've suffered some reputational damage over the way they communicated their issues with ransomware and cyber attacks. But statistically, the worst performers when in handling their reputational risk during an attack, suffered a 21% loss in shareholder value over the following 12 months. The interesting thing is, most business continuity professionals talk about recovering you ahead of where you were, giving you a bounce back and a bounce ahead of the rest of the market when you handle something really well. And this is backed up by the actual statistic, which says 18% performed above market trends where they'd handled things really well. And the reality is those winners responded swiftly and effectively to minimize damage from the event. The average decrease in shareholder value was 9% at the time. And the other element of this, which I don't mind talking about, but many people don't, is, when an organization handles a crisis badly, heads roll, people lose jobs. That is quite often members of the C-suite, because they are held to account rather brutally if they've handled the event badly. So communication is key for the longevity of the company, but it's also key for the longevity of some of the people who are working there. So next slide, please. And this I've called Pandora's box because, and I've used that term for the last 30 years about business continuity, and it's to do with how you deal with risk. Because once you've opened the box and looked at a risk, really you're obliged to make an informed decision about what you're going to do. So if you identify a risk through your business impact analysis and your risk analysis, and you just ignore it, then if that risk results in a crisis of some sort, then potentially you could argue the organization has been negligent, and that could lead you open to all sorts of legal action and general reputational damage. So that's Pandora's box, and that's beginning to be recognized because 80% of organizations now have an operational resilience program. And these are the latest statistics from the BCI Crisis Communications Survey of last month. So they've got a resiliency program. 70.3% say they have equal focus on external impacts and internal impacts, which I think is a major improvement perhaps from where we've been. But 48.5% of the respondents said they do not have the headcount and or staff time to implement a realistic policy. And that's why it's Pandora's box, because the problem's clearly there. The company have acknowledged it by putting in place an operational resilience program, but they've decided not to fund it properly. And for me, that is a major concern, because that actually works out at 32.5% of organizations in total are actually funding their resiliency and resiliency program properly. And that's got to be a concern for all of us. And to a degree, that is about the business case you present internally to your management teams to drive the investment into business continuity, resiliency, and crisis communications. Next slide, please. So again, in that report, it was a cracking report, by the way. If you've not seen it, I'd strongly recommend you have a look at it. The top challenges that organizations faced were 30% was communicating with customers and stakeholders. 25% was ensuring external communications are controlled. So clearly, there's a recognition for the need to communicate, but where people have actually experienced events, they've struggled in these areas. So I thought that was quite a strong statistic. Next slide, please. This one made me well, none of these should really make us smile, should they? But it made me smile because of certain elements of it. So 38.1% of organizations who responded to surveys said they suffered reputation damage following a disruption. And when you look at the triggers for the crisis team activations over the last 12 months, 45.2% was adverse weather. And I know in the UK that shocks a lot of people, but that probably says a little bit about climate change as much as the weather we've been used to traditionally. 43% said cybercrime. 41.9% IT or telecoms incident, and 8.6% invoked their crisis team because of reputation damage and PR crisis. And when you look at that, cybercrime, IT and telecoms incidents, and arguably even adverse weather conditions, they are the things that might wipe out your IT systems completely. So if you're reliant on your own systems for communicating in a crisis, certainly with cybercrime and IT and telecoms incidents, you may well lose that ability. So you've got to have an external channel that you own to communicate. And looking forward, and this is the Horizon Scan report BCI did, 11.1% were concerned about future risk of reputation damage. Interestingly enough, 76.7% said they were concerned about cyber security impacting them. If we go to the next slide, please. The interesting thing for me about those statistics was that they had reputation damage so low down in terms of percentages, because in my view, every crisis, however it is caused, is 100% risk of reputation damage. Now, I know they were looking specifically probably at incidents of that have caused a crisis and potential reputation damage. And we've seen the type of misbehaviors that gets organizations in the news. But what that can lead people to strain away from is the fact that if you don't manage your communications correctly around cyber, around IT failure, and around weather, you can still suffer significant reputation damage, and it can affect the longevity of your business. So in my view, effective crisis communications is your only defense for all of the investment you make in resiliency, in internal processes and procedures, risk analysis, and all of those things. And I also strongly hold the view, if you don't have or control a page of truth or a dark site, as we'd call it, that's instantly available in the crisis, do you really have a crisis communications plan? Because all the good work your people do and all the good work you do to protect the organization and get the message out there, as I said earlier, can be absolutely negated. And the key thing about crisis comms, and I'm all for taking the pressure off teams at times of a crisis, and being involved in IT disaster recovery for such a long time, I've been involved with a lot of invocations. And where it went well, organizations had pre-prepared, they'd planned, they'd rehearsed. And what the use of an appropriate technology tool does for your crisis comms and rehearsing and preparing, it allows you to have a fast and effective response to a crisis, but it gives your people and the organization time and space to address the issues that they face. And it's that time and space that's ever so important, because despite what people like to say about I work better under pressure, they absolutely do not. And I'm sure that's just one of the myths that was introduced when I was growing up, just to make us all work harder. So look, that's what I wanted to cover with you at the moment. We're going to show you a dark site failover later and talk a little bit about how that can help you. But it's over to Chris now to talk to you about more direct tips and the toolbox that you can take away with you today to hopefully implement within your environment. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, just picking up on a couple of things that Nigel said there, some of the stats he was showing about how organizations struggle with crisis communications. And it is a particular specialist branch of communications, because if you think about it, any other communications you're doing, you might be launching a new product or unveiling a new IT system, you will have all the information in front of you. Obviously, with the crisis, you don't have all the information in front of you. In fact, you may have very little information. So it's all about communicating to your stakeholders when you actually might know very little about what is actually happening. I think that's one of the issues that organizations face. They are used to having the information and the data in front of them, and when they don't, they take some time to formulate a response. And in crisis communication, you really do not have that time, as Nigel was just saying there. So what I'm going to be talking about is all about the preparation that you can do in advance so that you are ready to go, as it were. But I would stress that this is something really that you need to leave to the comms people. So I would, if there's one thing you can take away from today, or that you go away and do go and talk to your communications team, do go and talk to your PR team. But I hope I will leave you with some areas and issues you can raise with them and some questions you can ask them, so that you can be reassured that they have a crisis communications plan and that you can work with them should that crisis communication plan ever be invoked. So a couple of things to think about here. That's what I call the 3-stage process to getting your crisis communications plan together. These are the 3 key areas you need to cover. First of all, identify your stakeholders. Who is it that you would need to talk to in a crisis situation? Now, again, your PR or comms team, I would be very surprised if they don't have some sort of stakeholder map already. So do have a look at that. Go talk to them about it, interrogate it. But also ask them to think about how those stakeholders will change. For example, if it's a cyber attack and data has been compromised, then of course you're going to be talking to the information commissioner, for example. I remember going back to my Barclays days, we debanked a political party. And the next thing that party said was, well, we can't stand for election unless we have a bank account. So we instantly called the Electoral Commission and said, you're going to get a lot of press calls about this, i.e. do you have to have a bank account to be a political party? And we got a great quote out of them, which was, we don't care if they keep their money in a biscuit tin. So it's getting ahead of the curve in terms of the stakeholders. So once you have identified the types of crises you face, think about the stakeholders that you deal with every day, but think about those that may become involved given the type of crises that you might face. Then, of course, think about how you're going to get to those stakeholders. So this is your vehicles or your channels. So getting your PR people, if they haven't already done it, to do some sort of a channel audit. This is what I find when I go into organizations. They have many more communication channels than they really know about. Now that can be a plus, but it can also be a minus, because of course, in a crisis situation, all those channels have to be carrying the narrative. And then lastly, think about your messaging. Having some messaging just to begin the process. So again, once you've identified your crises, you know who you're going to be talking to, you then need to think about what sort of things would you want to say to them. But don't be too prescriptive. Obviously, you won't know exactly what the crisis will be, but have the bare bones, as it were, of messaging. For example, if it's a cyber attack, if it's some sort of reputational crisis, whatever it might be, have some initial messaging that you can then begin the process of kicking about, because like you can then go into your crisis management team meeting with at least something. Next slide, please. So this is a common stakeholder map. You have the organization at the center and you have all the stakeholders around there. Defining as stakeholders, those groups without whose support the organization would cease to exist. Just a couple to point out here. They're the obvious ones, like the owners, if you're a company who owns you, your customers. But employees are often forgotten about. So do think very carefully about those. Your employees are very, very credible commentators on your crisis, and the media will certainly try to get to them, and other stakeholders will get to them. What's really happening. So make sure that they are informed. One you might find a bit surprising there is competitors. If you are in a crisis, if you have relationships with your competitors, make sure they know your crisis narrative as well, because the media will go to them, other stakeholders will go to them, government will go to them. So this is about thinking, where might the media, where might government go, and all of those people who could be drawn into commentating on your crisis, have you got to them? Have you got to them with what your crisis narrative is, i.e., what's happened, why it's happening, and what you're doing about it? Next slide, please. So your vehicles to reach your stakeholders in a crisis. Again, probably your PR or comms team will be familiar with this model. It's called the PESO model. And it's an aid memoir, if you like, for thinking about all the channels that are open to you to get your crisis narrative to your stakeholders. So paid media, this is media you pay for. So is advertising, for example. You might think, how does that work in crisis comms? But it's not unusual at all for organisations to actually pay to get their crisis narrative across. Tesco did, for example, in the horse meat scandal, took out full-page ads in popular newspapers in the UK. Earned media, this is the mainstream media that we're all familiar with, and normally we're working really hard to get the media interested in our organisations. Unsurprisingly, when we're in a crisis, they may well be more interested than we want them to be. So how are we going to manage them? Who do we have relationships with? And who can we call on perhaps in the media to support what we're doing and listen to what we're doing? Shared media, by that we mean social media, and I'll talk a little bit more about social media in a moment, the pluses and the minuses. And owned media, and again, this is the area that sometimes is overlooked, and this is really where Nigel is talking about. This is your website. You know, how are you going to better manage your website? Are you going to use a dark site? Do you have one? What about any other media that you have that goes out regularly to your customers, you know, and your stakeholders? You know, think as broadly as you can about how you can actually reach all your stakeholders using the channels that you completely and utterly control. Because obviously, when it comes to earned media, the mainstream media, shared media, social media, you don't really own those, but those that you do are very powerful and can help you tell your crisis narrative effectively. So social media, this is a busy slide, but the point really of this slide is to say to you, think about how you're going to manage social media in a crisis in advance. There's a lot of prep you can do, and these are the sort of things you should be talking to your PR teams about. For example, when are you going to engage with what is happening on social media? Are you going to reply to every post? Which ones do you reply to? Which ones don't you reply to? Which ones are you going to take offline, for example? So you can triage, as it were. Once you know what the types of crises are you're going to face and who's going to be interested, how will that play out on social media, and how ought you to respond? One of the things also to do in peacetime, as it were, is what we call level setting. So this will be asking your PR team to look at what is normal in terms of social media and your brand or your organization. This is so that you can then judge when things are not normal. It's tempting in a crisis sometimes with management teams to rush down to, we need to deal with this now on social media, but perhaps that's not above what your team would normally expect. So what is normal, what is not normal, and what do you want to deal with and what do you not want to deal with in terms of social media? And the other thing to think about is how you're going to monitor social media. Really, really important. Again, I would imagine that your PR teams will have some sort of social media monitoring tool in place. There are lots of them. You'll go and ask them what it is, ask them what it's looking for, and get a little bit more familiar, as it were, with that world. Next slide, please. Then, of course, your messaging. So you've thought about who you need to talk to, how you're going to get to them, and then what is it you're going to say? Well, I've already talked about, picking up on Nigel's point, that the struggle of crisis communication, and a lot of that will be around your management teams, very natural reaction to, well, what are we going to say? We don't actually know what is happening. And it may be ages before you know exactly what is happening. You may never know exactly what happened. But these are the things to bear in mind when you're putting together your messaging. First and foremost, show concern for the situation. If you put the victims at the heart of all of your communications, you won't go far wrong. So think as a victim, what would victims like to hear from the organisation? Whatever victims they might be, maybe their data's been compromised, perhaps it's something even more serious than that. Perhaps it's your employees who no longer have trust or faith in the organisation because of some sort of reputational crisis. What would your employees like to hear? Always make sure your communications are very, very clear. Clarity is really important. It's always really important, but if you think about it, in a crisis situation, people are very emotional, they might be upset, they might be distressed. So the need to speak very clearly is even more important. And that can be difficult if it's a technical crisis, for example. But what you should be doing is working with your PR team to, boil down what the main points are that your stakeholders need to know and understand. And then the last three, control, confidence, and competence, I think you can kind of wrap those up and comes a little bit back to my point I made earlier on about when government gets involved, and government and regulators will get involved when they think you are not in control of the situation. However unfair that might be, and that really does come down to communications. You might be putting things right, but does it look as if you're putting things right? Do your stakeholders have confidence that you are the right people to put things right? So thinking about how you communicate, you're thinking about how you come across, thinking about the tone of voice, how you appear, how your spokespeople appear. Sometimes these things are certainly sometimes they are more important than the actual words. And with this issue of communicating in a vacuum, when you don't have all the facts in front of you, then if you don't jump in and at the very least establish the facts or talk about what we all know, and sometimes an organization might think, but everybody knows that. But the fact that you're saying that, and you're saying it with concern, with clarity, and showing that you're in control, establishes the organization as the port of call. This is where everyone should come for an update on the crisis, not somebody who's blogging or somebody who's on social media or a journalist on the Times or whatever it is. They should come to the organization first. Next slide, please. So think about how a crisis unfolds. This is when I got really interested in many crises that I've kind of lived through and worked through, is that they do follow this kind of trajectory, as it were. Bubbles along, something will happen that will trigger it, where it moves from perhaps a specialist newspaper or social media onto the mainstream media agenda, and up it goes. And that box there is obviously, this is when you are trying to resolve the crisis, hopefully in the best interest of the organization. And when you need to communicate that you are controlling the crisis, it's really important to make sure your stakeholders are aware of what you're doing, because otherwise they will just assume you're not doing anything at all. So from your public relations team's point of view, embed them at all of these stages. Make sure that they are involved in helping you predict what crises might look like, how they could be prevented, how you can resolve them. This is your crisis comms plan, your messaging, your stakeholder identification, and your channels. So going through the respond, and then obviously into the recovery phase and the lessons learned. Next slide, please. So thinking about your crisis communication checklist, make sure that you have identified those crises with your teams, your PR teams, that are more likely to happen and would be the most damaging. In terms of defining a crisis, I would refer to the BSI, the ISO standard, which talks about crises as being an existential threat to your organization. Those are the ones you really need to watch out for and prepare for. Make sure that there is a system to provide early warning and a process to escalate. And again, that your PR team are drawn in at the right point. Have your crisis ready management and communication team, have them in place and make sure you know how they come together. And then think about your information management capability, because crisis communication is about getting information in and pushing it back out again at speed and under a tremendous amount of pressure. Next slide, please. So this is a fairly typical crisis management team structure. I'm sure you're familiar with this. You may also have gold, silver, and bronze as well. This particular structure is common in travel companies, for example, airlines and so on, because the RRT is relative recovery, relative response rather team. But right here on the far left, I've got the comms function. Please ensure that your comms function is properly represented on the crisis management team. And when I've been that person, the team tends to meet twice a day, usually in the morning and at the end of the day. And a standing item on the agenda should be, how is our crisis narrative being responded to? How is it being received? Do we need to change it? And if so, what are we going to say? That should be a standing item on the agenda for every time that crisis management team meets. Next slide, please. So thinking about your toolkit, just some very basic things to think about here. Telephone tree, that sounds really old school, doesn't it? But I refer you to Heathrow Airport. Nigel and I were talking about it only the other day, and many of us now rely on mobile phones as alarm clocks, and many of us have mobile phones that just go into sleep mode. And if you followed the Heathrow Airport fire story, the chief executive couldn't be reached because his phone had gone into sleep mode. So we might have to have people who go around houses as well, knocker-uppers, as Nigel and I were joking about. So think about how you're going to contact everybody that you might need to contact. Think about who your spokespeople might be. Your PR team should have identified spokespeople for the various crises that you might face. Make sure they're media trained, and make sure you have a range of spokespeople, because chances are the one that you would normally use will not be available. Or it may be that certain people would work in certain environments and certain crises. Make sure you have some of your key messages, but be prepared to flex them. There was a blog I read the other day, if you're following the airline industry, the Air India crash and the crash in the United States with the helicopter and the airline. If you analyze the two statements that were made by the chief executives, they were virtually identical. So people pick up on that now. So when you are drafting your messages, make sure they are specific to what is happening, and make sure that they are authentic and credible to the organization. That's really, really important. Have all your media facts and figures together that you might need, your number of customers, number of transactions, number of countries you're represented in. You do not want to be running around trying to find that. Have your stakeholder map and who owns those stakeholders. For example, if it's a regulator, maybe better if the chief executive picks up the phone than you write to them or email them or whatever. And think about your channels, your communication channels, who owns them, and can you take them over very, very quickly to use them purely for your crisis narrative. Next slide, please. So just a summary of things to think about. Go away, talk to your PR, your comms teams. Make sure you've thought about the risks of poor crisis communication. Nigel's outlined many of them in his slides earlier on. Make sure your business continuity planning thinks about reputation as well as operational risks. Organizations are a bit nervous sometimes about talking about reputational risks, perhaps fearing that might, I don't know, perhaps make them happen. But we all know how damaging reputational crises are for organizations. So make sure you thought of those as well. Make sure your comms, your PR embedded into all stages of business continuity planning. And if you can test those plans with your comms people, in fact, it shouldn't be an if, you should be doing that on a regular basis. And make sure you have a channel that you can control. And I think what Nigel is doing with Press Area is a really, really good thing for you to think about, particularly if you're facing the type of crisis where your normal channels will be taken down. Next slide, please. So over to Nigel and Marcus.
Thank you. Before we move on to the demonstration of the dark side, I just want to pick up on a couple of things. In many of the discussions I've had over the months, I've got the impression that the first time the business continuity teams and IT DR teams and other teams have met the PR teams have been in the middle of the crisis. So I'd suggest to everybody, get to know your PR people, get to know their crisis plans. You don't want to be meeting them on the day, because that's just going to cause you problems. And another thing is the tone of the message and getting the words right. Now, this is a very old story, but if you were on my previous webinar, you will know I worked for British Rail for a short while. But many years ago, there was a major failure of the rail system in southern England, and the spokesman for the railway said it was due to the wrong type of snow. You may even hear that used now in jest when people talk about interruptions to transport services. Now, what he meant to say, because I was at IBM at the time and my branch manager asked me, what was that all about, Nigel? What he should have said, and he should have got a few political points in while he was at it, was unfortunately we were obliged to reduce the cost of our rolling stock. So we designed it to operate in winter conditions that are typical of those we face in the UK. Unfortunately, the snow we had the other day was powder snow, which is very rare in the UK, that was sucked up into our electric engines and caused them all to short circuit. That's what he should have said. It's long-winded, it's longer, but it's totally accurate. And people would understand that it was a problem of the design and the reason why, rather than just the snow. But that taught me a lot about getting the message in a form that is digestible, even if it is a bit longer. Right, now we're going to nip over to the actual demonstration of the dark site now. Marcus, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. I'm the technical director at Press Area, and I've been there for about 7 years, and we look after lots of big clients. But before that, I was a journalist, so I was one of the people that used to attack companies when things were going wrong. And one of the issues that I always had as a journalist was trying to find what that one source of information. You'd look at the website, you'd look at the social media, you'd ring them, you'd email them, but there was never one place where you could get information. So what we've been trying to do at Press Area is just build that one place so that media can go to one place. They don't have to look at all of the different social medias. They don't have to look at various different websites, because lots of businesses have multiple websites these days. So Press Area is there to do that. So Press Area at the moment, we have sites like British Airways. So this is the British Airways Media Centre that we look after, and we have Waitrose, which is also John Lewis Partnership. So in fact, that's John Lewis, Waitrose, and John Lewis Partnership in one. So we managed to squeeze three brands into one on that one. But yeah, so we look after big companies who are all looking for ways to be able to change the message that they have from this happy looking nice message that you get from their website to something that actually helps them with a crisis. So I'm just going to show you our demo site. So this is our demo site. It's for a made-up airport, there's an advisory message on here saying the Need for Speed BCI demo could close runways for the day. So they've already identified some sort of problem that could be happening. So let's imagine that the problem's happened. So how do you change what you have here, which is all the news stories? So there's all the press releases on this website. There's imagery, there's videos. It's really complicated. Where is the information that you need if you're the media and you're coming to this website? So what I'll do is I'll go to our admin for the dark site, log in. This is our dark site admin. It's very simple. The thing is, if you're in a crisis, you don't want lots of choice. You want to know where things are. You don't want to have to go, oh, is it in the images section? Is it in the video section? You just want one place where everything is. So we just go to the press releases. So we've got lots of previously created releases. So this is what Chris was saying. It helps to have things already there and already done. So we've got, we've written a Need for Speed press release. Let's publish this and make it live. And now let's activate the dark site. So we click on activate. We put in our password. We get an email.
And this is where I hum to help Marcus while he looks at his email.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, dive in, Marcus.
No, yeah. So we get the email. The email come through literally within milliseconds, and it's a short password on this. We want a password to make this secure, but also we want a password that somebody can talk to somebody over the phone. It doesn't have to be 15 characters long, because you're in a crisis. The last thing you're going to be good at is typing. So we've got short passwords for this. So it then goes away, and it goes, and then we got little green thing saying, "Congrats, you've done it." So if you go back to our demo site and refresh, we've now got the dark site. So none of the previous site exists to the media now. All they see is this one page, and it's the information that you as a brand want them to see. There's got nothing else on there. So as your crisis happens, you could start to add to that. So we have a follow-up release. So let's just publish that. And we go back to the demo and refresh. And here's our update statement. So we've now found the problem. Somebody in Hamburg, it's a crocodile in Hamburg that was causing the problem. So let's go back. We can now crisis over. We want to change back to where we were before. So we go to deactivate, put our password in. We get sent an email. The other thing is the email also, you get emails to all of the people who need to be contacted to say that it's gone into a dark site. And you also get the email to say it's no longer in a dark site. So let's now put the password in there, click again, and wait for a couple of seconds. Go back to the demo, refresh the page, and we are back to our normal site. And that's it. I will stop sharing.
Thank you for that, Marcus. One of the things that got me excited when I first saw that was I realized really a number of years ago the concept of the golden hour that we've had around business continuity and crises, where people think they've got this magical breathing space to allow them to respond, just doesn't exist anymore. You know, a crisis waits for nobody. And to have the ability to switch from a standard website to a dark site in a matter of minutes, to put up some initial messaging, does a lot of things in terms of positioning your organization as being serious about managing risk, managing crisis, and managing their reputation. And although we shared some of our very well-known customers as examples, Press Area and the dark site costs as little as £500 a month. So in terms of organizations, our bigger clients use it because it offers a lot of good workflow tools to improve the efficiency of their PR teams. But in terms of any organization of any size, the dark site facility is it's highly usable, it's easy to use, it's reasonably priced, and it will immediately give them the protection and the posture that they need when they're managing their reputation in a crisis.
One of the other things, sorry,
yep.
the initial messages on there, it's in one central place. One of the problems that businesses have to put those initial messages is, where are they? Are they on email somewhere? Are they in a folder somewhere? Everybody can see that. Everybody who has a password to get into that system will be able to see those initial messages and add to them and edit them as well. So it's brilliant in as you were saying, in terms of managing your messages.
I just think also it will have quite an impact, positive impact, on how the PR and the comms team are actually operating during a crisis, because it will cut down a lot of the stuff that will go to them that really shouldn't be going to them, because it won't just be journalists who will be going to your website, and it will be other stakeholders going to your website too and using the same information, who might otherwise be trying to get through to the organization, and usually often ending up with the PR team and gumming up the effectiveness, if you like, of your comms team during a crisis.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of our customers who did suffer a major IT outage and lost all of the communications a number of years ago had their clients, global clients all over the world, actually accessing the dark site on Press Area to get up-to-date information, so they understood what the position was, when the services would be restored and where they are. And it's an interesting example, because I don't like to pick on this organization because I think they're a fine institution, but many of you will know that British Library suffered a major cyber attack in November 2023. They did not have a web presence for over a month. And all of the crisis communications, I eventually found out, because I did search every day, were linked via an X post. Now, I'm not on X. It's a social media platform I don't use. So if you're not on X, then what do you do? And that's why I strongly believe it's important to have a single page of truth that you can direct everybody to, whether they're social media users or not. And that gives you the opportunity, as Chris said, to decide whether you address social media questions or whether you just direct people to the page of truth. So there's interesting options on your strategy there. So in terms of, unless there's anything you want to add, Chris, in terms of the formal presentation, that's it. And happy to take any questions you might have.
I mean, the other thing to say is, in terms of social media, yeah, it's difficult when people to know in which social media to put information on. But with the web, everybody can get the web. Everybody has access to it, whether it's on a your watch or on a mobile device or anything. It's accessible. Yeah.
Actually, we've got a question in which is from Lee Mills. Thank you, Lee. Is it taking off the internet, the access to all of an organization's website pages? Is it making DNS changes? And Marcus is the ideal man to answer that, because I'm certainly not.
It depends what you want to do, really. So what we have for most of our clients is a media page that's just specifically for press and media. So I'm not sure if you saw, the British Airways one is media.britishairways.com. So what we're doing is we're changing the British Airways media.britishairways.com to the dark site, but all of the rest of the British Airways site would still be going. So I'm just using those as an example. But if you wanted it to be the whole of the site, then you could do that as well. There's not a problem.
And the next question, does the dark site not then become critical in a single point of failure? How is this mitigated? Well, that is the Jake, thank you for the question. That is the question that I faced year after year when I was involved with IT disaster recovery services, and it's a judgment call. Yes, in terms of press area, we have backups and disaster recovery arrangements. So if the dark site then becomes hit, we can recover. And we're in the cloud, so we've got recovery in different segments of the cloud. But it is always a judgment, this, because it's a question of how much mitigation is affordable to your organization, and how much it is, and how likely is it that you're going to lose the protection alongside your own infrastructure. I'd argue that providing the press area solution in the dark site is in a completely different cloud environment to your own website and your own IT, then the likelihood of losing both it would be highly unusual. And as I always used to say, I used to cover a lot of insurance companies in the City of London back in the day, and they used to say, what would happen if there was a major incident of the City of London? Could you cope supporting all of those customers? And I think you've got to look at the difference between an individual company being hit and a whole industry being hit, or a whole geographic area. Because if, for example, you were in the cloud and you were affected and your systems were lost, and also we were affected, that tells you it's pretty major, and you're probably looking at not being in a disadvantaged position compared to your peers within your industry. And that's really the argument, certainly we used to discuss with insurance companies, about what is their competitive position, can someone take advantage, and normally that was an accepted argument, but it's all about money at the end of the day. But we do have DR arrangements, we do get you back up and running. Is there anything you want to add on that, Marcus?
I mean, we're a proprietary system. Everything is in-house, so we don't use sort of software from other companies. So if anybody was going to try and sort of take the site down, it's not a standard site that they they were taking down. I mean, also, I mean, the other issue is people have said, you know, what happens if a lot of traffic hits your site? Is it capable of doing that? And yes, it is, because we have, this has been used by clients, and very large clients, and we've had people from all over the world trying to access the site, and there was no problems with that. So one of the companies that we used to work with was Thomas Cook. When Thomas Cook went bust, we had their site, and what we did was we actually swapped it to our dark site, and there were 250,000 people around the world holiday makers, who were trying to find information about how they were going to get home. And the only place that they could get that information was on our dark site, and it worked fine. And also we have the media from all around the world as well hitting the site. It coped with that, not a problem.
Thank you. And the solution, Thomas Cook was one of the companies that actually requested the dark site solution, because they were very concerned that should they have a crisis or a terrorist attack or something happen to one of their resorts or one of their planes, that the media and people would log on to their dark site and still see happy, smiling people on holiday, and would perhaps be able to download pictures of the actual resort or the actual plane involved. And they felt that wasn't right. And that again is about the posture of the organization and how they want to position themselves and how they want to look when they're managing a crisis. So I'm conscious that we're coming up to the time limit for the webinar. We've got
There's just a question, Nigel. I see it in Q&A from Grant.
Oh, sorry,
Hampton.
missed it.
No, sorry. Shall I just? I can pick it up. What's your view on using artificial intelligence to support the creation of crisis communication? Well, you won't be surprised, Grant, to hear there's a huge debate about that in crisis comms, as there is in pretty much every industry you can think of. Yes, it can help, but I would be cautious about the use of AI. I would use it to really sort of double check your own thinking or reinforce your own thinking. I mentioned earlier on this issue with the two airlines recently, where their crisis narratives, as delivered by their CEOs, put side by side, were pretty identical. And I think that's the risk of using AI to generate your messaging, but using AI to support you, like, have I actually covered all the possible stakeholders? Have I actually covered all the possible channels? That sort of thing, AI can really, really help you. And again, checking your crisis comms plan. Have I covered all the bases in terms of my crisis comms plan? Your AI can support you. So there is definitely a supporting role, but I would just urge caution around using it to actually generate messaging, because it's becoming, I'm not saying the airlines in that instance did that, but as more and more people do use AI to create messaging, it's a real risk, and it will be identified, and it will cause you reputational damage.
Thank you, Chris. Could we have the last slide, please? And that's just our contact details. If you have any questions after the webinar, or you want to talk to us, we'd both be delighted to talk to you and chat things over. We'd be delighted to connect with you on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope you found the webinar valuable. And as I say, if you've got any questions or comments, please do let us know. And hopefully we'll all catch up at some stage in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.